Welcome back. This is another cooking class with the Fine Fit Catering with AZA First Nation. So thank you for being here. We are doing another freezer class. So for those of you who have been in a previous freezer class, we made various things that are really easy to either eat right away or put in your freezer and then have a meal so that you don't have to worry when you're coming home from work and you just don't have time. So tonight I really like these things that we're doing. We're doing a couple soups. They're pretty hearty, so they make for an easy full meal. And we're gonna do a bread as well. I love scones. Scones are perfect for like an easy breakfast that you can grab from your freezer and throw in your toaster, but they also make a beautiful side to a soup or something that you can eat right after your dinner. So let's get started. We are going to first talk about stocks. As you notice with your chicken soup recipe, we've got some stock to work with first. So I'm going to show you my stock pot. By the way, I usually say a couple things at the beginning of the class that I forgot to say. This video is going to be recorded and accessed later on. So just in case you come in late or you don't have a chance to do all three things tonight with me, you can always take a look at it later so you don't have to rush through it. Okay, so let's get started. We have a stock pot right here. And you'll see I have a couple things in it so far. If you can see this, we've got some chicken bones from our rotisserie chicken. I just threw this in about half an hour ago. So if you do have a pot with some water in it and you've had a chance to separate your chicken, so many of you have a chicken from the grocery store, rotisserie style, pretty easy to just pull apart, put the bones in your pot, and then set aside your chicken because we're not going to cook with that right away. We want to focus on the bones. The bones are what's going to give not only great flavor to the soup, but there's some really cool stuff in the bone marrow that gets into your stock that is really good for your body. So get a little bit of extra flavor and health in there. I also have some bits of onion. So you'll see I cut the tips off the onion. And as long as your vegetables are well washed, you can put any kinds of scraps in your stock pot because we're gonna of course strain all of this out and then we'll have a beautiful stock when we're ready to use it. I got this started a little bit early because in the case of my soup, I want to make sure I complete it for you by the end of the class. Usually a stock takes about an hour to simmer. For us tonight, I'm going to shorten that time and we're going to simmer this stock for about half an hour before we start our chicken soup. So for you, it's totally up to you. If you want to make this stock and make your chicken soup second so that the stock has a little bit more time to simmer away, you can totally do that. Or you can have an easy stock, which is water and chicken bouillon, which of course, because we're making chicken soup, goes really nice with it. A couple other things I've thrown in this stock is little tips of my parsley. And parsley and leek are perfectly fine for a stock. And the reason being, parsley and leek are part of the onion and herb family that is very mildly flavored. It's not a weird vegetable such as rutabaga or broccoli that will contain so much of its own nutrient and known flavor that it's going to flavor the stock a little bit too much. So it's not going to taste like chicken stock, for example. It'll start tasting like a broccoli stock or a cauliflower stock or a rutabaga stock. So I'm telling you vegetables that are all part of the mirepoix family. And it's just a French word for saying these vegetables are really great in stock. They don't overpower the flavor, but they make the chicken flavor even better. So far, we've got some bones in the pot. We've got onions, a little bit of leek, and a couple sticks of parsley. So what we're going to start with today is peeling our carrots and getting little bits of carrot and celery. We can put any of that in the stock as you wish. So everyone get a pot out, get your pot with some hot water, put your bones in there, and let that simmer away while you work on your vegetables. I'm going to grab a peeler. We're going to start working on our board. Now I've already worked with my celery. So we've got our celery. The heart of the celery is the leaves in the center. And all those little leaves can go into your stock pot, and then just make sure your celery sticks are nice and clean and ready to go when we're ready to do our soup. Next thing, carrots. Now my carrots are pretty small, calls for 4 large carrots, so you can approximate. If you love carrots, throw in 6 carrots if you want to and you don't want to do 4. I'm going to peel these carrots before I cut the ends off because I like having something to hold on to. So if I'm holding on to the small end of the carrot, leaning it down on my board, I find this is the easiest way to peel. You don't have to do both directions. Oftentimes when I used to do carrots, I would flip them and then I would do the other side, but this just cuts your time in half. So hold on to the small side of your carrot, peel it straight down. All these little carrot peelings we usually would throw away, but today we are making stock. And these carrots, cool thing about the peels of vegetables, they contain most of the nutrient of that vegetable. So carrots contain vitamin C, vitamin A, and a lot of that vitamin is right in these peels. When the peels go into the pot, all those vitamins are now dissolving into this stock, and you've got a really healthy stock. Okay, throwing that in there. Got a couple more carrots to work with because I am personally very fond of carrots, something that my kids like. So when that's kind of a win, right? If you have a vegetable that you like, throw a little bit of extra of that in. Or substitute a vegetable from a vegetable that you don't like as much. Soup is one of those things where you get to be as creative as you want to be, of course, within reason. So other vegetables that would go really nicely in this chicken soup, other than the ones I've already put on the recipe, is butternut squash or turnip or rutabaga or various types of potatoes. We're doing a red skin potato today, but there's all sorts of different kinds of root veggies that if you really like them, throw them in your soup as well. All right, I'm giving that stock a stir. My stock has come to a simmer already, so I'm leaving it on a medium low. The idea is that you want the stock to just stay above the simmer point, but not boiling. You just want to see a little bit of bubbles happening so that you know that it's doing its work. After you simmer this stock for, say, I don't know, an hour or two, there's a point where it actually loses flavor. So don't simmer this stock for 8 hours. 8 hours is actually too much. There's a point where you gain flavor and then you start to lose flavor. So I would say if you want to write on your recipe, you can say no more than 2 hours. If you want to try a different method, you can throw some things into your slow cooker and that cooks even lower. So then you can actually, leave for the day and come back and you can have a stock ready by the end of the day. But on the stovetop, max 2 hours. Okay, so now that these are peeled and ready to go, I'm just going to cut the tips off. The tips on the right side, sometimes they're kind of soft and weird and have a bit of the greenery on them. I don't put those in my soup. I'll just set those aside and I'll put them in my compost or garbage can. But I will take the trimmings off the bottom of these carrots. Take those off. There we go. And put them in the soup pot. Okay, so how are we doing, everyone? We've got our stock pot going. We have our vegetables peeled and ready to go. And I can set those aside because our chicken stock is what we want to kind of let simmer a little bit longer before we work on our chicken soup. So we can now change directions and talk about our leek soup. Now we've got a question. Yes. So we had a question, can you just use store-bought chicken broth, pour that into a pot, and maybe throw the celery and carrots and maybe add extra flavor? My answer is absolutely, because what you have is a flavorful stock from the store. You're just adding more flavor and more nutrients to it. So that is that is a good idea. So what we're going to do is talk about our leek and potato. I'm just going to ask my husband, Steve, can you grab the red potatoes and the other potatoes? They're in the garage on the bottom. My husband's going to grab some potatoes while we talk about leeks. Now, hopefully everyone purchased some of these. These ones, it's hard to use another vegetable that is similar to a leek unless you're just going to use more onions, but leeks are special. They have their own flavor. They're not nearly as strong as onions because this is pretty hefty. We're going to use almost as many leeks by volume as we're going to use potatoes. So leek and potato soup. Now, I've got a number of potatoes I'm going to work with. We're going to do russet potatoes, so not the red ones, but the brown ones. Those are going to be part of our leek and potato soup. Those ones are called a starchy veg, and they're really good with this kind of soup. So we've got a few of those. Let's just do russets for now. With our leek and potato soup, we need about 2 pounds of russet potatoes. And I know it's probably frustrating if you bought a bag of 5 pounds. So at this point, just approximate. So look at your bag, 5-pound bag of potatoes, take about half out. You've got 2.5 pounds. Throw a couple more potatoes back in the bag and you're good to go. If you have a kitchen scale, great. But I would say when it comes to making soup, don't worry so much about being too particular. We can adjust the flavors of the soup later, and we can also adjust the thickness. So no big deal. So we've got about 2 pounds of potatoes here. I'm going to wash them later, but we'll start with our leeks. So take a look on the board here. The tips of these leeks, I've already washed the outside. So the tips of the leeks are going to be set aside for now. But the inside of your leek can be really dirty. So let's take a look inside and see how they're doing. Some leeks are dirtier than others. So if you peel back all of these layers, you've got quite a few things happening here. And sometimes it's harboring a little bit of dirt. Not bad. These leeks are pretty good. But you need to cut them in half like this before you rinse them out, just so you don't end up with a bunch of garden dirt. Sometimes it's not a big deal because it's not full of chemicals or anything, but it's just dirt and you don't want that in your soup. Now, the green parts, these ones are a little bit tougher. So what I'm going to do is cut these in half as well and just take the outside layer off. Take the outside layer off. You can wash these and throw them in your stew pot. I have enough leek in my pot, so I'm going to just save the rest of these. Sometimes, you're working with vegetables and you're not ready to make a stock right away. Take these little scraps, put them in a freezer bag, and then one day when you are ready to make your stock, you've got it ready to go. Okay, I want to show you this. This is the piece of leek that has bits of dirt in them. So you can see right here, take the peel off, you see the dirt in between. Got some dirt here to deal with. So I'm going to make sure that I cut these all in half and give them a really good rinse along with those potatoes. So I'll go over to my sink, give these a rinse, and we will start chopping things. Here. And then my other scraps, I'm going to set these aside for my next stock. All right, now hopefully you have some nice leeks ready to go. chopped up, we are going to melt butter, or you can use bacon fat. So I've rendered some bacon. I've got some nice bacon fat at the bottom of this pot. Bacon's delicious, but not everybody wants bacon in their soup. So you can put butter in, and that's delicious too. But if you happen to have bacon and you want to take the time to fry your bacon and save that bacon fat, it tastes really good in a leek and potato soup. So I've made this. Generally, the recipe is vegetarian, but if you want to add your bacon, you can. Now, it calls for onions as well. And as I mentioned, the leeks and the onions have slightly different flavors. So I am going to put a couple small onions into this soup as well. So what you can do is turn on your stovetop, make sure your butter is melted if you're using a little bit of oil as well. And remember, approximate. You don't have to be super particular about the exact amount of everything. It just says 2 tablespoons. You can add maybe a couple tablespoons of butter, a couple tablespoons of oil, melt that together, and we'll be ready to go. Okay, so let's get this started. You'll notice in the past, I have talked a lot about chopping onions. So if you want to do a close-up again on the onion, I'll just do a bit of a review for those of you who have been in previous classes and are quite adept at chopping onions by now. Remember, I'm going to take the knife on the side, and so we're going to actually cut through the onion horizontally, almost all the way through. Notice how my left hand is sitting on top of the onion. So if I do make a mistake and I accidentally slip and I go through the whole onion, I'm not actually touching my left hand. So it's a much safer way of having your left hand. And then now turning the onion using the tip of the knife, about 3 or 4 little cuts all the way through your onion. I don't go right to the end most of the time just because I want to leave the onion intact. There we go. Okay, now take your onion and put the tip of your knife on the board. You're going to practice that slicing method where you're just that rocking motion. And it's very fulfilling when you do master this motion where you can slice that onion and it feels like you have much more control over your knife if you're not just pushing up and down like this. Your tip is on the board, slicing through the onion. There you go. Now onions take a little bit longer to cook than leeks, so we're going to start with our onion, get it going in the pot. For those of you who are crying right now because your onions are so strong, a little trick I learned is to cut the ends off your onion early, throw them in your stock pot, and then let your onions sit for a little while with the ends cut off. What's going to happen is whatever hurts your eyes is going to just seep out of the ends of these onions and do their dirty work away from your eyes. 80% of whatever it is that attacks your eyes will already have come out of the onion by the time you use it. So maybe give it half an hour or so. I'm going to grab a nice wooden spoon. I really enjoy using wooden spoons to stir, especially if you're using a pot like the one I'm using right now, because this pot can certainly get, if I'm using a metal spoon, for example, it can scrape the bottom of the pot. And so a wooden spoon or maybe something like made of silicone is perfectly fine. Give that a good stir. While our onion is cooking, only needs, a minute or 2. Let's chop up our leeks. So we've got the leeks already sliced in half, rinsed out really nice, ready to go. I'm only going to take a small pile at a time. Steve, do you want to leave that one on? Sit down. Small pile at a time, just so it's already sliced one direction. So all I need to do now is practice keeping that tip on the board, sliding through. And we're going to do about a 1/2 inch thickness in these leeks. Now you might be looking at the sheer volume of leek that we're using today. It might seem like it's too much for the soup that you're making, but trust me, leeks will definitely cook down to half their volume, and of course will not taste nearly as strong as an onion. So never fear, use all the leeks. You might want to add, by the time you add the leeks, you might want to add a little bit more oil or butter, up to you. By the way, please do check in once in a while if you are falling behind, if you have any questions, if you missed a step, please do, you can ask in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask away. You'll notice my left hand, that's my guide hand, and I'm practicing that method I taught in a previous class where my fingers are curled in. They're not sticking out like this. You're not going to lose a fingernail tonight. You've got a nice, hopefully everyone has a nice thick knife like this chef's knife here. And we're using our right hand sliding through, and our left hand, our guide hand, I should say, is just right next to the knife, but curled in. If there's two of you working together in the kitchen, this is a great opportunity. If one of you is chopping these leeks, the other person can be working on peeling your potatoes. And then by the time the potatoes are peeled, the first person will be ready to chop them. There we go. And that covers all of the leek in this soup. Now my onions are bubbling away. They're doing great. It is now time to add these leeks. This soup is in the family of blended soups. So you'll notice I didn't put a lot of effort into cutting the leeks up in perfect squares because we're going to blend this whole thing after. Blended soups are great because you can experiment with different things. Then you blend, then you can taste test afterward. So you don't have to worry so much about making your chopping perfect. Okay, stirring in these leeks into the onion base. Smells great already. I'm going to let this simmer for a little while. Remember, my chicken stock is simmering away as well. And I'm going to work on my potatoes. So not super exciting, but we're going to do a little bit of peeled potatoes. Of course, some of you might think, well, why bother peeling? In the case of these potatoes, there's a little bit of green right underneath the skin, and it's called solarian. And it's just from solar as in sun. It means that the potatoes were stored in too light of a space, like close to the sunlight. And then it causes a weird green layer right inside your potato skin. And many of you probably seen that in potatoes. It's not very good for your body. It doesn't digest very well. So I tend to, whenever I see this, I just peel all of it off. So even though I said, you know, the vegetable, the nutrients are right under the skin, in this case, totally fine to peel. If you were going to use your potato without peeling it, I would scrub it really well. You also probably noticed that with this soup, you're not using all the vegetables like other soups. Most soups use carrots and celery as well, but we have the flavor of the carrots and the celery in our stock, so I'm not too concerned about that. And so this soup is a very pure soup. Leek and potato is our main two ingredients. You'll notice the potatoes, these ones here with that little bit of green, I'm giving it a bit more of a peel than I normally would, just to get underneath that layer. Now I'm just going to give my husband the rest of these potatoes. I've got 3 done, but I'll just get him to peel the rest of them while I give you a bit of a review of what we're already doing. So for those of you who jumped in late, we have sauteed our onions in the either bacon fat, butter, oil, whatever kind of fat you would like, depending on your preferences. And then after a little while, after the onion is softened, then you can add your leek. And of course, don't worry if it looks like a lot of leek, it's going to cook down. We're going to add about 2 pounds of potatoes as well. We're also going to add our homemade stock. It can be chicken stock, ham stock. You can add water if you want to, but just put a little bit of bouillon in it as well. I'm going to use a little bit of this chicken stock for both. Use a bit of chicken stock for the leek and potato soup, a little bit of chicken stock for the chicken soup later as well. Now, what I'm going to do right now is change gears, because what we want to do is have our 2 soups and our bread all ready to go when we're ready to eat at 7 o'clock. So in order for that to happen, I would like to get us started on our baking project. So if you want to take your onions, carrots, celery, that kind of thing, set it aside for a minute. I'm going to show you the beginning process of our scones. Get those started, get those in the oven, and then we'll come back to our soups. I thought it would be good to get a couple of these things started, and then move back to our baking and come back to soup after. Okay, so leaving my soup stuff right here, I'm going to shift over and tell you a little bit about our scones. To make these scones, you're going to need a large bowl, and you can either use your hands to make those little bits of butter, or you can use what they call a pastry blender. So it's totally up to you. I'm going to show you what my pastry blender looks like, and we can either, and I can show you a little bit of both methods just so you know what to do. We're going to leave this leek and potato soup on very low as we're finishing up the potatoes and getting things in for this soup. We'll do that in a few minutes once we get our scones ready. So I'm going to grab a bowl. Okay. No. And I'm going to grab my pastry blender. Now, your dry ingredients that you need for this baking project is baking powder, flour, and sugar. So pretty simple, and hopefully most of these ingredients were already in your pantry, so it wasn't too much work. Now, is it okay, Stephen, if I'm over here? Like, is it okay to shift it a little bit? Okay, perfect. So we're going to start with 4 cups of flour. This is larger than a regular recipe because we are calling this a freezer meal class for a reason. We're doing a lot of soup, and we're doing a baking project that can be frozen and then pulled out whenever you want and baked, or you can bake it in advance and then freeze the fully completed scones so that you can pull them out and put them in your toaster. So either way works. You want to do 4 cups of flour. I do want to show you what I generally do with the flour. Take your scoop, put it in the cup measure, tap it so that you can remove any air bubbles, and then use either your scoop or the flat side of a knife and make sure it's flat. This is much more accurate than just grabbing a scoop. And as I mentioned before in previous classes, when it comes to soup making, we're cooking. So it's an art. And we get to kind of play around with the ingredients. We can add a bit more of this and a bit less of that. But when it comes to something like a scone or any kind of baking, it's more of a science. And so getting your amounts right is a little bit more important. So for those of you who are new to some of the baking things, you want to focus on getting as much accuracy as possible right away. And then you can get a little bit more creative later on. Okay, so my third one. And fourth. Got 4 cups of flour. And then with the 4 cups of flour, I'm using a tablespoon. Uses quite a bit of baking powder, 2 tablespoons in total. Doing the same thing with my finger, I'm flattening it out. So 2 flat tablespoons of baking powder. Now I am using some salted butter. I'm using a bit of unsalted, but a lot of salted butter. So I'm not going to bother adding salt to this. If you're using pure unsalted butter, you can add your own salt. If you are using margarine, it's also salty, so you don't have to worry about adding salt. This is a pastry blender. You can use this to blend your butter in. If you are not using a pastry blender and just using your fingers, you want to make sure that you cut this butter up into pretty small pieces before you blend it in. So I'm going to grab just a little knife that I can chop up my butter, which seems kind of silly, but yes, you want to chop up your butter into tiny pieces. Now, it might seem like a lot of butter, but it is the right amount to create a flaky crust. It's sort of like making a pie crust. It's creating a little flakiness in your biscuit. Now, this is called the biscuit method, simply because you are chopping up any kind of fat like butter, you're mixing it in with the flour, then you're adding your liquid after. And they call that in the baking world the biscuit method. So I'm chopping this into little bits so that when I do use my pastry blender, it's just a little bit easier to blend together. You can take this butter directly from your fridge, by the way. You don't have to let it sit to go to room temperature, because cold butter, it creates these tiny little bits of butter. And when it bakes, it creates that lovely flakiness because the butter is all melting in the high heat of your oven. So going in, I'm going to mix my baking powder in first. Then I'm putting the butter in. And then just using my pastry blender, I'm squishing it down. So for those of you working in twos on the other side of this screen, one of you can be working with your pastry blender or using your fingers. And when you use your fingers, you just squish it like this. And you just pick up little bits and squish them. It takes a bit more time. So I like using a pastry blender. I would continue to mix this. I'll move it a little closer so you can see. I'm going to continue to mix this until those bits of butter are the size of tiny peas. Kind of like the peas you would put in pea soup, tiny. Now, because this is a lemon and blueberry scone, there is one other ingredient we're going to put in this after we cut our butter through, and that is lemon zest. For those of you who have purchased a bottle of reconstituted lemon juice, you can just add some lemon juice to your milk as it says in the instructions. But if you did have a lemon, I'm going to show you what we can do with our lemon. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So if you can see, I don't know if you can see the actual size of these, but it looks pretty good. They're the size. Some of them are slightly larger than others, and that's okay. And it's mostly the size of little peas. Move it around. You can move your bowl in circles as you go. This could be helpful too. There we go. Now that it has mostly tiny peas, I can take my lemon. By the way, at this point in the making of your scone, it's safe to turn your oven on. It's going to take us a little while to finish it, but in that time, the oven can preheat. Scones are a little bit different than muffins. They need a high heat, 425 degrees. Muffins are usually like 375, 350. 425 gives it that oven spring. And oven spring means high temperature. That baking powder is going to get to work really fast and rise that scone before it sets. So I'm going to turn my oven on to 425. If you have convection, use it, because convection gives you a nice even brown on all sides. If you don't have convection, not a big deal, but don't put your scone at the very bottom, put it right in the center of your oven. Now I have a zester, and if you can find something like this, or if you're using a box grater, the very fine side of the box grater will do just fine. So I'm going to take my lemon. I'm going to give it a quick zest. And when I say quick, I mean move your lemon after you go down one strip, move it so that you're not zesting over one section more than once. So you're just getting the zest. You're not getting that white stuff underneath the zest. It's called the pith, and that is very bitter. It doesn't look like a lot of zest, probably a teaspoon or maybe 2 teaspoons, but it's enough to give that extra delicious flavor. What you have left is just a zested lemon. Cut it in half and then grab a lemon juicer that you might have. You can also juice with your hand straight into your little wet measuring cup. So this is a liquid measuring cup as opposed to a dry measuring cup like this. This is more accurate and easier to see when you're looking for how much liquid to put in. We're going to do milk, which is about 160 mils. Then we're going to throw our lemon in and we'll make about 180 mils in total. So first of all, I will squeeze my lemon in. I'm just using my hands. I use my left hand, my guide hand, just to make sure that there's no seeds. We have a question? Oh. There, squeezing that lemon in. Looks like maybe 40 mils altogether of lemon juice. I'm gonna go wash my hands from that. And then fill up to your 180 mils with your milk. You need 180 mils of milk altogether. Now, what happens when you add lemon juice and milk? The milk will curdle. Terrible to drink right now. Don't take a sip, but really nice in a scone recipe. A couple other things we can add now is the sugar. And then just using a spoon or your lemon or your mixer, your pastry blender, whatever you have, mix in that sugar, that lemon zest. And now our final ingredient are eggs. We're going to put this all in the same measuring cup. So get out your eggs. It calls for 4 eggs total. Now, if you're a bit nervous, I would break this into another bowl and then mix it together. But if you're okay, you can mix it right, you can break it right into your milk and lemon juice combination. You'll notice I'm hitting the egg on the countertop rather than the edge of this. And I do this so that the eggshells don't get punctured into the egg itself. Because it's a nice flat surface, it's easier to work with. I don't hit the tip of the eggs, I hit the very side, and I take my thumbs, push in, and open it up. For all you kids that want to crack eggs. And then you can just take a fork and give that a little mix. And this mixture, of course, it's not going to look that good, but together it's going to look great. So now let's take this here. We're going to just gently pour it in. The idea with any kind of biscuit method, whether you're making biscuits or scones or muffins, you only want to add enough liquid that it turns into a dough. If it gets really soft and sticky, then it's not going to work out as well because it gets tough. The minute you add liquid to flour, it starts creating gluten. And gluten, if overworked, gets pretty tough. The only time that you want to work gluten, by the way, because some of you might be thinking, what about bread? You have to knead bread for like 8 minutes. That's a lot. But you do want to work the gluten into bread because you need the gluten to be tough for the structure when it rises. But with a quick bread, because the whole process doesn't take very long at all, we want to mix it just lightly. Okay, so you're seeing that I'm using this fork to mix it all together. And it should form a ball. So if you're looking at this right now, you're seeing that it's forming a ball. And I'm just going to stir it until it all comes together in the center. There we go. Okay, looks pretty good. You'll notice it's thick, nice and thick, not too sticky. We are going to split this into 4 little balls. So I'm going to move everything over so I can show you how to do this. Now, whatever space you're using to roll out your dough, just make sure you've got plenty of room. You might want to move all of your soup making stuff over just for a minute, just to complete this first. You might want to wipe it down just in case. And keep your flour handy, because what we want to do is have a bit of a floured surface to work with. You do not need a rolling pin. This isn't complicated like you're making a pie crust. This is quite a bit easier. But before we start handling our dough, let's get a couple trays out that we can bake it on. I'm going to use a cookie sheet. In fact, because they do rise, I'm going to use 2 cookie sheets. For those of you who want to freeze some of this dough, once you split it into 4, take some plastic wrap, wrap it up, and put it in your freezer. And then this is the point where you can just pull out the dough and finish the process later on. So it's kind of fun because this particular recipe, you can stop it at the dough, you can make them completely and freeze them as whole little scones, or you can bake them now and then have them ready to go in your toaster. So for now, we're going to just do the entire process so you can see exactly how to do it. I'm going to get some parchment paper because that is way easier to work with than having to spray down or butter your pans every time. Parchment paper is great. So got our two pans, our parchment paper on them, and we've got our dough right here. I'm going to grab a little bit more of that flour. So give your surface a little extra flour. Wipe it around. There we go. Turn your dough onto that surface. Use your fork to just get any little bits off. Okay. It's looking quite beautiful. And then sprinkle a little bit of flour right on top. Now this dough is ready to turn into 4 balls. Grab whatever knife you want, it doesn't matter. I'm going to get a big serrated knife like this one, and I'm going to cut this ball of dough into 4 pieces. Starting with our first ball of dough, scrape away some of the extra flour. This is what we're going to start with, this beautiful piece of dough. I'm not going to knead it at all. All I'm doing is turning it into a little ball. The more you work dough, the tougher it's going to be. So try to just work it really gently. Here we go. And see how it's just a little circle about the size. It should be about the size of your hand, actually, if you're a small person. Now let's take our second ball of dough, do the same thing. If it feels really sticky, just give it a little bit of flour. Do the same thing. You're going to turn it. See what my hands are doing? I'm just turning it, flattening it into a flat disc. Like we're making giant cookies. Here's our third one. So these are the lemon scones. But what if you want to add blueberries? Blueberries are pretty tricky because with blueberries, if you mix them through your dough too much, it streaks the dough. And when you combine blue from blueberries and yellow from lemon, what do you get? Green. So you're going to get a green product. So this is the part where we have to be really careful. So I'm going to grab my blueberries. I actually am using tiny little wild blueberries. For those of you who go blueberry picking in the summertime, these ones are from our last blueberry pick in the fall or in August. And then I freeze them in freezer bags. So I'm going to use a few of those. And I'm going to be very gentle with combining them into a scone. So just take them, push them into your scone. We use a little cup measure and scoop out some blueberries, pushing them into the scone. And this is going to make a beautiful, not green. Of course, if you're not too concerned about that, you can just mix it in right before you work it in, right before you turn it into these nice discs. It's totally fine that the blueberries are frozen. If they weren't frozen, they might squish even more and then create a bit of a mess. So that's great. And now you're just going to fold it over one time. Your blueberries are now in the center of your disc. Now it looks like my oven is almost ready to go. So these are almost ready to finish up. There's a couple more little bits of equipment that we're going to need. If you have a pastry brush, grab that. So we're going to brush the tops of these scones. And then if you do want to put a little bit of sugar on top, you can. I'm using a coarser sugar. You can use any kind of sugar that you would like. I'm going to add a little bit of flour to the tops of these. And then you can flatten them out a little bit again. Okay, so creating little flat discs. I'm going to grab my pastry brush, and then I'm just going to put a little bit more milk into this same cup measure, just so we don't have to waste any dishes. I'm going to wash my hands and we will finish up these. You can use that same knife you used earlier. I'm going to put a little bit more milk into that. Oh, my oven is telling me it is ready to go. So adding just a little bit of milk to your container, you're just going to use this so that the sugar has something to stick to, really. So each one of these circles makes 4 separate scones. So let's just go like this. You see that okay? I'm going to cut this into 4 for now. And I'm going to take my brush and brush it with milk on top. Then I'm going to take this sugar and just give it a little sprinkle of sugar. Now each of these is going to be the shape, and you see how those blueberries are perfectly in the center. When they're on the outside as well, they do create a bit of a burning opportunity, so you want to avoid that. Here we go. Second one. Take your knife. First of all, give it a brush. A bit of sugar. If you find that your scones are sticking to the workspace just a little bit, you can take maybe a metal spatula, just get underneath it a little bit easier. There we go. 1 pan of scones ready to go in the oven. I'll do both right before I throw it in though. Got our third one. You don't want to open your oven too many times. Just once is good. You can decide to do it this way as well. I'm brushing the entire thing with milk. Then I'm going to do my sugar. And then I'll cut it. Whatever's easier for you. Oh. So our scones, the oven's ready, singing away. The scones are ready to put in the oven. I'm going to set my timer for a little less than it calls for. So it calls for 12 minutes. I'm going to set it for 10 minutes because you never know with your oven. If 12 minutes is a little bit too much, it might get a little too brown. So 10 minutes, safe. You can check the temperature, you can check the color. And if you're finding it's browning too quickly, but not quite cooked in the center, you can tell by just breaking open one of your scones, then lower your temperature and finish the cooking down at 350. But for now, we like the idea of oven spring. We want it to rise very quickly. Putting my scones in the oven, setting it for 10 minutes. There we go. I'm going to just scrape my space so we can go back to our soups. I'm now much more confident that our stock is ready to go and that our dessert will be ready to go by the end of class. So I'm just going to set aside all of my dessert ingredients. And scrape this into the bowl. My husband's just finished peeling those potatoes, so we can carry on to our next stage. So this is called sweating. When you cook onions at a very low temperature, they slowly cook and develop flavor, but they're not actually browning. I'm at a very low temperature right now. I can actually crank up my temperature again because I am ready to add our chicken stock. Our chicken stock has officially been simmering for about an hour, so I'm happy with that. I'm going to show you the color of this stock. It looks quite beautiful. Not sure, it might be kind of hard to see. Can you see that okay? It's a beautiful kind of honey colored. Yeah, I see like this one. I'm going to put 1 liter in for now. And then 1 liter is the same as 4 cups. So if you happen to have a 2-cup liquid measure, just take 2 big scoops out and that should be good. I happen to have a 1 liter scoop. I'm going to put 1 liter in for now. We might need to add a little bit later. We're going to add cream later. So we'll put our stock in a little bit more. And then we can finally add our potatoes. Now the potatoes don't have to be cut up perfectly. Remember, they are just going to be blended fairly soon. So I'm just going to cut them up into about 8 pieces per potato. And while this soup simmers, I'm going to show you the method for making our chicken soup. So now we're getting these potatoes into the pot. You see how I'm doing this, cutting them lengthwise, taking that tip on the board again, giving a couple slices widthwise. Don't be alarmed if this soup seems pretty thick. You can always add a little bit of stock later. There you go. And I'm going to put my board. It's nice and clean and ready to go for our next soup. So allowing this soup to just come to a simmer and cook away. This soup will take about 10 minutes for the potatoes to cook completely. And then I'll pull out my blender and show you the last step. If you have a lid, a tight fitting lid, that's ideal. I'm going to move this soup pot to the center of my oven because it's no longer going to be the main event. And we are going to work on a new soup. Now, I'm going to just move my stock. By the way, all of this extra stuff at the bottom, it's done its work already. It's already imparted all of the nutrients and the flavor into the water. So you don't need this anymore. So I just let it cool in my sink and then throw it away. Okay, now our final soup. We are going to do a quick chicken and vegetable soup. This is not going to use any starches because both of these soups, I wanted to make it very easy to make it both gluten and dairy free. So that makes it a little bit easier for anyone in your family or that you know with dietary needs. So getting started, you can use, just like before, any kind of fat you would like. This time I'm going to be using butter. About 2 tablespoons in the pot. Allow it to melt. And while that is happening, you can cut up your onion. You do about 2 onions for this. You should be quite familiar now with the onion cutting method. So I will just do this again. Now that we've worked with the onions for our leek and potato soup, we can be a little bit more specific about the size of these onions. We want our onions, our carrots, and our celery to be about the same size. Because this soup is not going to be blended, this is a chunky soup, and you want all of your vegetables to be the same size for 2 reasons: for even cooking, but also for visual appeal. Like you don't want giant chunks of one thing and tiny chunks of another thing. Okay, so horizontal slices done. Vertical slices, I'm doing about 1 centimeter apart. And that makes a small to medium dice. Hopefully, the more you cut up onions, the easier it becomes and the more efficient you feel. Okay, my butter is melted and ready to go. I'm going to take my wooden spoon and take all of these onions and put them in the pot. Now I do need some red potatoes for this particular soup. Now red potatoes are different than the starchy potatoes, like the russet potatoes we used in our other soup. Red potatoes are waxy, and they're a better potato, not for blending, because they can get kind of gummy if you blend them, but really good as chunks. So it just calls for about 4 potatoes in total. And I'm not going to peel these ones. I'm just going to scrub them because these ones are colorful and fun and deserve to keep your skins. Okay, so let's do some carrots and celery while we let our onions simmer away in the butter, while we're letting our other soup simmer away. And my stock, I've got about, let's see, got about 3 liters of stock left. So I'm going to use 2 of it for my chicken soup, and then I'll use whatever else I need later on if we need it. Okay, so getting started again with the carrot. I'm gonna just lean this down so I can, I'll let Steve do that later. Now I'm following that same method where I'm cutting them into strips and then slicing them into small pieces. And then putting this in the soup pot. Now, if you hear the oven in the background, it's telling me that our 10 minutes is up. So we're going to take a look at how they're doing so far. These ones need about 5 minutes. So I'm going to give it another 5 minutes. I'm just watching how they're rising, how they're looking. They're looking great. So I'm going to let them carry on for a little while. Can you do a close-up on this one here? There. All right, carrying on with our carrots. As I mentioned earlier, I'm trying to do about the same size as the onions. So take a look at your pot and go, okay, that's the size I chose for my onions. Some of you might choose larger size and some of you might choose a smaller size. Totally up to you. So I'm going to do kind of a smaller size with my soup. A little bit easier to eat. My kids like it better if it's smaller. If you're using a pretty large size, it kind of reverts your soup into a stew. A stew is larger chunks of vegetable, larger chunks of meat. Putting our carrots in. Got a couple more left. You'll notice I like to do a very high amount of vegetables in my soups. This is how I sneak vegetables into my kids' bodies. When we're having a soup night, we often just have soup and a bread or soup and toast. So I want to make sure they're getting all their vegetables within that soup. Okay, these carrots are all about the same size. Following that same method I was talking about before, that rocking motion with your knife. And then finally, our celery. Celery is kind of the same thing. We start with sticks, and in French cooking, it's called bâton. You're making long sticks, then you're turning these long sticks into cubes. Once again, our combination of carrots, onions, and celery, our mirepoix, is going to flavor this chicken soup really well. There we go. So here is our celery. We've got all three here. Let this cook up just a little bit. So you can keep your heat on medium high because you want to simmer these vegetables in your butter or your oil. Saute them for a while we cut up our potatoes. So these are now scrubbed and ready to go. I'm keeping the skins on. If you have an aversion to that taste of potato skin in things, then you can peel them off. Now the potatoes, I'm taking a look at, once again, at the size of my other vegetables. It's okay if your potatoes are slightly larger, but try to keep them about the same size. There we go. From the looks of it, it looks like I have about the same volume of potatoes as I have of my onions, my carrots, and my celery. So it's a nice even allotment of vegetables. Potatoes is a little bit of a tricky thing. Once you cut through your potatoes, they're going to start oxidizing, as in turning a little bit brown on the outside. So this is one thing I just can't do early and let it sit for a long time. I have to do this right away, put it in the pot right away. Now our oven is dinging again. Let's go take a look at our biscuit. They're almost ready to go. I will bring them over as soon as they are perfectly browned. I'm going to give it 5 more minutes. These are pretty large, so you might want to adjust your timing as well. And they do spread out a little bit, so giving them space on your pan is a good idea. I am fond of potatoes in my soups simply because when you add rice or pasta to your soup and then you're going to freeze it and serve it again, the rice and the pasta will inevitably overcook. So it's going to soak up too much water. And if you've ever had soup with pasta or rice in it that's overcooked, it just looks like a bit of a mess because there's so much pasta because it's kind of swelled to so much water and it's very, very soft. So potatoes don't do that. Potatoes will cook at the same rate as your other vegetables, and then they're not going to overcook after that because they don't keep swelling up with water. So potatoes, even though they do not freeze nicely on their own, they freeze very well within a liquid like soup. I've tried to freeze mashed potatoes before. Trust me, not a great idea because they do lose a lot of their water in the freezing process. So it looks kind of dry with like water seeping everywhere when you try to defrost your mashed potatoes. So people have come up with ways to freeze your mashed potatoes by adding a bunch of butter and milk, because the milk will actually keep the mashed potato from losing a bunch of water. But I would say the best way to freeze potatoes is within soup. Okay, so now that our vegetables have cooked down a little bit, we can add our potatoes. The potatoes do not need to saute in the butter like the other vegetables do. What I'm going to do is give them a quick stir and add my stock right away. About 2 liters of stock. And save a little bit at the bottom. Now there's a couple things we can add to this soup while it's coming to a boil. There's 2 of my favorite things to add. Now you get to choose, because you're the artist, you get to choose what extra little flavors you're going to add to your soup at this point. One of my favorite things to add to soup is thyme. Thyme is delicious. Little pinch of thyme. I like to add rosemary. All of these are excellent herbs. They go beautifully with chicken. So a pinch of rosemary. And then I'll put a couple bay leaves in. Now, for those of you who are like, I don't have all of these separate herbs, you might have an herb mix. So something like a garlic herb combination or Italian herbs or something like that. Just put a teaspoon of that in, and that will add that herby flavor that we're going for. Because I'm using dried herbs, it's okay to simmer them away. If I'm going to use a fresh herb in a soup, I don't add that fresh herb right away, because if you boil a fresh herb, it just loses its flavor. So I do have a couple of these delicious fresh herbs in this bowl, being some mint, no, some dill and some parsley. This I'm going to add at the very end of the cooking. One more thing that you can add for extra flavor, garlic. And if you were with me when I did any kind of Greek or Italian cooking, garlic is one of those things that it's so delicious and it's so good for you that I usually add more than it calls for. So I'm probably going to put about 3 or 4 cloves into this soup. You're noticing I'm cutting the tips off here. If you cut the tips off, it's just going to be easier to peel them. Now take the side of your knife and give your garlic a bit of a crush. If you don't happen to have fresh garlic, put a sprinkle of garlic powder in with your soup. This garlic could be added at the beginning with your vegetables, but it does burn easily. So if you want to stay safe, you can add it at the very end after your vegetables have already sauteed. Now I'm going to just take this handy dandy garlic press. If you have one of these, it's great. And we'll throw a little bit of that garlic in. And now our chicken soup is ready to simmer away. It's not too hard to make a soup. I think we often get intimidated because we think it's going to take a long time, but making a soup is not only wonderful for now, it saves you time later. It makes a full pot. Okay, so our oven is ready. I'm going to move some space over because I believe our scones are going to be ready to set out. So I'll just give us a bit of space over here. And oftentimes I like to use these little cookie wrap to transfer the scones to. Okay. Now look at these. These are golden and they have risen so beautifully. I'm going to give them just a couple minutes. You see how soft they are still on the inside? You don't have to break these open to know they're done because they are so beautiful and golden on the outside. You know they're cooked in the center. There's a bit of residual cooking, it's called. When they're hot and coming out of the oven, they're going to cook just a little bit more. So it's okay to leave them on the pan for now. But in a little while, we're going to take them off the pan so they don't start to sweat and get kind of wet on the bottom. Take them off the pan and we're going to put them directly on those cookie sheets. So I'm going to leave it for now. And we're going to take a look at our soup because at this point, with our bread coming out of the oven, both of our soup simmering, we are going to be at our last stages of finishing up our soup so that we are ready to eat. I'm going to move some of these things over. And I'm going to bring my blender over to this side of the kitchen so we can blend our soup together. Couple more ingredients that we're going to need to finish up this soup. One of them is a light cream. And by light cream, it's just a coffee cream. So it's the half and half that most of you would use in your coffee. Now I'm just going to take a look at the potatoes, make sure they are cooked. If they're a little bit tough still, we are not going to want to blend them. But yes, they are cooked all the way through. That's great. One little trick that I've learned in making this kind of soup is if you like that green color, this is your chance to throw in a little fresh greenery. So if you love spinach, put a little bit of spinach in. If you love parsley, parsley is pretty neutral in flavor. Chop up a little bit of parsley and throw it in before we blend it. Then you have that bright green. I like to use the vegetables and the different herbs on top as well. But for now, I'm going to get a little bit of this lovely parsley chopped up and right into my soup. Doesn't have to be finely chopped, just coarsely chopped is fine because it will be blended. There we go. And then what you will need is another pot, because when you're blending a soup, you need to have a pot that it's currently in and then a pot that it's going to. So for those of you who are thinking, I don't have any pots left, I'm using one pot for this and one pot for this, you can also use a giant bowl, stick it in the bowl, and then you can pour it back into your pot. It should take about 2 blenderfuls to get it all the way through. Now, depending on how strong your blender is, I would just recommend you leave it at a medium to a low speed. If you're blending a soup with potatoes in it, there's always the danger of over blending. Potatoes are kind of strange that way. They have a lot of starch in them. And if you blend starch too much, the starch molecules break up and turn into a different texture than you're used to. So it actually turns into something that's kind of gluey or gummy. And that texture is not appetizing. Even though the flavor of the soup hasn't changed, the texture is really strange. So let's just blend minimally. As soon as it's smooth, you're done, okay? And I'm going to take a look at the soup, make sure it has enough liquid to blend. So at this point, I can turn it off. I'm going to get some of that beautiful leek and potato soup into this blender. And then in order to thin it out, we're going to add some cream. And then leaving it on low. I'll try to blend it over here instead. It might be a problem with my blender. Okay, looking at that. Soon as it's just blended, I'm going to turn it off and move it to another pot. I thought I had a technical problem with my outlet, but it was my blender. Didn't turn a switch that I was supposed to turn. Okay, so getting our second batch in. Same idea. Put your soup in, add a little bit of cream. And this is when you get to decide on the thickness of your soup. And get the rest of the soup into the blender. This is the particular soup pot that I'd like to use to show you. So I'm going to clean this out really well. So I'm going to end up putting this right back in here. I'll grab a little bit more stock to thin it out. And a little bit more cream. Okay. Now, for those of you who are not trusting your blenders right now and happen to have an immersion blender, you can do the same thing. My immersion blender takes a very long time to blend an entire soup. So this is just a more efficient way for me. But if you do like your immersion blender and prefer to use that, that's totally fine as well. Now that you've blended your soup, you can transfer it back to your other pot if you wish. And I wish. And then you want to just leave it on low if you're going to eat it tonight, or just allow it to cool right away. But this is the point where we do all of our taste testing. We don't want to taste test at the beginning of soup making because you add so many things to it. And the flavor changes after you blend it anyway. There's all sorts of things that are happening when you blend a soup. So this is the point where you can add your salt and pepper. I have not added any salt and pepper. Even the stock itself is simply the chicken bones and the vegetables. I don't add any salt to the stock because the stock is always used in something that is then flavored. So for now, we're going to add about a tablespoon of each, maybe a little less of the pepper just to get us started. Maybe a teaspoon of pepper and a tablespoon of salt. And then grab yourself a taster spoon, because this is the fun part. You want to taste your soup. Make sure you're happy with the flavor. Make sure you're happy with the texture as well. Hopefully everyone's chicken soup is bubbling away. We haven't added our chicken yet to our chicken soup because chicken does not need to be simmered and cooked. It's a rotisserie chicken. It's already cooked. Okay. I'm going to give this a taste test. This is our leek and potato soup with cream. That's very good. I'm going to add a little bit more salt, but otherwise, I am happy with the flavor of this soup. So I'm going to stir that in. When it comes to thickness, my soup is quite thick. I could get away with maybe adding a cup or two more stock or water, and then it would be perfect. So I will add just a little bit more to thin it out. And if that is the case, you can pour your stock or water into your blender, into your other pot, just to make sure you don't waste any bits of that wonderful soup. There we go. Okay, so blended soup, I'm going to allow to warm up and sit there for a little bit. We've got enough time now to finish up our chicken soup. It's about, I would say, 10 minutes to simmer with our small cut vegetables. Because they're small cut, they're going to cook quite quickly. You'll notice that even the leek and potato soup needed no more than 12 minutes to cook those potatoes. I'm going to grab a spoon. Let's take a look at our chicken soup and see how we're doing. Usually I can just stir it and feel the vegetables and know how they're doing, but I'm going to take one out, give it a little slice just to see. It is cooked. That's great. I'm going to turn this down to a low simmer. We're going to add our chicken first. Now, I had talked about in a previous class the color of my boards. And so you did notice that this is a green board. This I use for all of my vegetables. I'm going to be cutting up chicken, however, and chicken is a cooked vegetable. A cooked meat, not a raw meat. So I have a particular board that I use for my cooked meat. I use a red board and a yellow board for my raw beef and my raw chicken. So I try not to get cooked products and raw products mixed up. So I use this white board just because it's easy to clean later on. And here is our rotisserie chicken that many of you probably have the same kind of chicken. I've taken the bones out already. So now it's just the chicken, but it's not chopped at all. So I'm just going to take this chicken and cut it en masse. And as you chop it, just make sure that you're aware if there's any little bones you missed out on when you first took the bones out, because I usually miss one or two. So this is my chance to just kind of check on it, make sure I don't have any bones left in here. So here's one little guy. Get that bone out. Here's a little bone. And with the amount of soup that we've made, one full chicken is a perfect amount of chicken for a nice hearty soup that will last you more than one meal. So another theme with our freezer meals is the kind of meals that are quite inexpensive to make that go a long way. And I think that's why over the years, especially during wartime, people would make a lot of soups because it was an easy thing to make, would feed a crowd, it would stretch a long way. And then, of course, when we're talking about the size to cut your chicken, just look at your vegetables, try to approximate about the same size. I'm happy with this. I'm going to add my chicken as the last thing to our nice hearty chicken soup. Now, a final thing that is actually not necessary, but some people really enjoy it, is to thicken your soup slightly. I don't really need to thicken my soup. I really enjoy the soup just the way it is. But say you wanted to turn this meal into a stew, you would basically follow the same process. You would cut your vegetables larger. You'd leave your chicken in larger pieces. And then at the very end, you could take 2 tablespoons of cornstarch and about half a cup of water and make it a slurry. A slurry is simply a combination of a starch and water. And then you add that slurry to the soup at the end, being careful to keep stirring. Then you can make sure that it is a little bit thicker. So it's more like a gravy rather than a soup broth. However, I really like it this way, so I'm going to leave it just the way it is. So you've got a really nice chunky chicken soup here. I'm going to do the same thing, add some salt and pepper, and then taste test it. And the same thing that I did with my other soup, putting a bit of parsley at the end, brightens up the flavor and the color. You'll see in the recipe that it calls for frozen peas. Now, my kids really like to put frozen peas directly in their bowl when they're eating their soup. So what it does is peas are already cooked, frozen peas. You throw them in something hot and they're ready to go. As soon as you boil frozen peas, they kind of turn into like a weird off green color, like an army green, and then they lose their flavor. So peas, that's one thing you want to add just at the end of your cooking. It brightens the color. you don't need to cook them very much. So I'm going to taste test this first. Make sure my broth has plenty of flavor. It's good. A little bit more salt. And then I'll add some peas. I'll save a few peas for my kids to add to their soup later on. You can get your peas in giant bags. We use quite a bit in our family, or you can get them in these little bags. So add approximately 1 cup of peas to the end. Or you can add 2 cups if you'd like. I'm going to add 1 cup for now, 1 cup later. There. And as I mentioned, a little bit of that parsley. Going back to my vegetable board, I'm going to switch my knife because this knife has a lot of chicken on it now. So just a fresh chopped dill and chopped parsley make a big difference when you're serving your soup. And many of you, when you have your family and it's busy and you don't really want to garnish anything, that's no big deal. But say you're having company and you want to make your soup extra special, I would chop up some herbs, maybe have some crumbled bacon, maybe do something special to finish up your soup for your guests. So I'm going to plate both soups in a bowl and do a little bit of garnish on top, just so you see how I would serve it. And then I'm going to move these fabulous scones onto the rack so you can see the finished product of the scones as well. We are almost ready to present all of our food. So for those of you out there that maybe don't have your screens on right now, if you would like to show me what you're up to, if you have a soup done or if you have your scones done and want to show the class what you've been working on, please do let me know. I love to see. Paige has also said you are free to put a picture maybe in an email or whatever. I can't remember what she said. I think just throw it in an email so that we can all see what you're making. Yeah. Paige, if you're there, maybe make mention of what they could do with the photos. Oh, I see a scone. Oh, that's beautiful. Have you tried it yet? This is Michaela, right? Michaela and Hannah? Oh, you still have to try it. Okay, grab some butter. It's really good with butter. Maybe I'll grab my butter as well. And then I'm going to put these beautiful scones on the drying rack. So you can see the size of these is like giant breakfast size or dinner size. Another fun thing I like to do with these particular scones, if you want to switch it from breakfasty to dinner like scones, you can do a little bit of like a lemon and icing sugar drizzle. So a little bit more lemon juice, some icing sugar, mix it together. There'll be like a glaze of sorts, glaze over top of your scone. And now I'm going to grab a couple bowls so I can plate our 2 soups and show you the kind of things that I like to use as garnish. Because we're doing this dinner style, we're going to use nice big bowls. First one, our chicken soup. There we are. I'm going to throw just a little bit of that parsley. This time I'm going to chop it a bit more fine. And there's our chicken soup. Now, with our blended soup, I want to combine a bit of parsley with some of this fresh dill. For some reason, leek and potato soup tastes really good with fresh dill. So I'm going to put a little fresh dill here, some parsley, so it's not too dilly. Give it a good chop. And as I mentioned earlier, I did fry up some bacon. So I'm going to use some bacon for this particular garnish as well. And here's this is how thick I chose to make this soup. Of course, you can make it a little thicker, a little thinner as you wish. Here's our leek and potato soup. Some bacon in the center. And a little bit of those herbs. And that, my friends, concludes our freezer meal class with two beautiful soups. We've got our hearty, chunky chicken soup with vegetables. And then this is the beautiful leek and potato soup with cream and some bacon and herbs. And then, of course, all of these beautiful scones. If you can't eat them all in one day, which you likely won't be able to, I would freeze them right away, because fresh frozen, they call it, it's so tasty when it comes out of your freezer. Slice them in half, put them in your toaster, and you're good to go. With these two soups, I would put them in either jars. Jars aren't the best for freezing. I usually use yogurt containers. Those work well. Make sure you put about an inch of headspace at the top before you cover it, because anything that freezes will expand. So if you fill it right to the top and then put your lid on, it's going to break your dish, or it's going to break your jar. And I have had a frozen jar with the glass jar break in my freezer, so I did not love that. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed tonight's class. I would love to see some pictures later on, and let me know how you did. And of course, you can go back and watch the video as you will and make it again. Have a great night, and I will see you next month.